So this is a 1980s-ish, early 80s Honda Odyssey FL250. So this one is not running. I bought this one kind of as a package deal with a couple other Odysseys. I've got a couple other videos kind of showing some of the other ones that I've gotten running so far. This is kind of the last one of the bunch to get going. So at one point, this one was obviously some sort of flat track racer. It was set up to be that way. It's got an aftermarket cage on it. Obviously some aftermarket body work on it as well. So this one was complete and everything, but motor on it is stuck. It's also missing the flywheel and the recoil at the moment. So the goal is to get this one running again with the stock motor. I'm not 100% sure if this motor will be salvageable. I don't know for sure if it's just the piston that's stuck in there. I pulled the spark plug out and let it soak with some oil for a while, and even put a big wrench on the primary clutch to get it to turn, but this thing was very stuck. Didn't want to budge at all. So the goal is to pull this motor out. We'll see what's wrong with this one. I do have another motor sitting here, which this one spins over nice and free, but it's low compression. So I think between the two, hopefully I should be able to make some sort of good one. Or worst case scenario, I'll put a piston and stuff in this one, get that compression where it's supposed to be at on it, and drop this motor in there. But so that's kind of the plan. Try to get this thing started on here, and we'll start pulling this motor out and see what this thing's all going to need. Alright, motor's nice and out. So I got that sitting over here. So this is the motor that was in it. That was stuck. When I pulled this exhaust off, there was all sorts of rust that fell out of this thing. So I'm guessing that this motor probably sat outside and got all sorts of water in it. So this was all the rust that fell out of that pipe when I pulled it off. So we'll pull this motor apart here. Let's see where it's stuck. I mean, down inside there, I'll get to focus. No, I can't quite see it. Piston doesn't really look scratched up or anything, so we'll kind of see if it seized in the crankshaft or if it was the piston. Like I said, this is my other motor. This one spins over nice and free, but that one's got like zero compression. Maybe I'll get lucky and make one good motor out of the two, but we'll see here in a little bit. Okay, head's coming off slowly. Head seems okay so far. Piston doesn't have any holes in it or anything. I'll see if we can get this cylinder off too. I might soak that with some oil here a little bit. There we go. Starting to pop loose. Okay. Cylinder's off. And the piston seems free, honestly. But that crankshaft looks horrible down in there. You can see there's all sorts of water down there. So it looks like our crankshaft seized. Got some water in there and rusted, so I'm kind of curious if I can steal this top end and throw it over here on this motor and see if we get some compression out of it. Enough to run anyway. Well, let's do that part next. Okay, motor number 2. Let's pull this cylinder off, see what this one looks like. Said this one had no compression. Okay. That seems like it's obviously just been cleaned. Really no carbon on that. Cylinder off. Well, the cylinder looks good. But looks like maybe these rings are shot on this one. This top ring has got a real big gap to it. It might have just been the issue. I might measure the bore of both of these pistons and stuff and see if either one of them has ever been bored over. This cylinder looks a lot better. Still got some cross hatching in it. There's no rust or anything either. Maybe we could just put a new piston in this guy and we probably have compression. I mean, everything down in the bottom end looks nice and clean. Feels nice and smooth. Cool. This is kind of promising. This is the motor that spins. I pulled this, or I pulled the piston off the other one. So this one, it's marked 40 thousandths over, and I just kind of checked. I put this piston into the cylinder off of this guy, didn't fit and stuff. So I think what our plan is here is we're gonna clean this piston up. These rings seem to be totally fine, honestly, as far as end gap goes. And then this is the cylinder they came out of. We're gonna clean this cylinder up. There's a little bit of rust down in there, so we're gonna use some evapor rust, let this thing soak, clean this thing up, give it a hone, clean our piston and stuff back up. We'll put it back in there and kind of check the end gap and stuff, and then throw it back onto our motor with a good crankshaft, and we'll spin this thing over and see if it builds some compression at all. Okay, cylinder's sitting in my bucket. Picked up a gallon of some rust dissolver. We're gonna let this soak for a while and see what it looks like. Should take care of that rust, and then we'll give this cylinder a hone and clean up our piston real good, and we might have a runner again. I'm working on the recoil for this motor. I just pulled off this little cap. This recoil was off of it when I got it. Down inside here, this is the little plate that kind of holds the little pawls in place that grab the flywheel. This plate's broken, but it's all there, so my plan is I'm going to weld this back together, and then in the random parts that I got with these Odysseys, I got a couple of these new pawls, so we'll weld this together, put this back together, and hopefully this recoil will be salvageable. Alright, that piece is welded back up and grounded back down nice and flush. I got my new little hooks and pawls back in place there, so we're going to put this cap back on, and then we'll check and see if this recoil operates the way it's supposed to again. So that's back together, pull the rope, and we'll try to do this one-handed here. Catches there, throws out, grabs the flywheel, when release it, sucks them back in. So okay, my cylinder's been sitting overnight. Let's see what this thing looks like. Looks a lot better. Yeah, before down on the bottom skirt it was pretty caked with some rust. Looks pretty smooth right now, so I think I'm gonna clean this thing up some more, and then we'll give this cylinder a hone and clean up our piston and see what the whole thing looks like. Well, I'm going to change my plan. So this is the cylinder. I just cleaned it up really good and then just kind of give it a light hone. After I got it cleaned up, that rust was pretty far. You can see some pretty good pitting in there. This cylinder would need to be bored over. I was hoping I was going to be able to salvage this, but that's not going to be the case. Kind of see there, it's, especially down the bottom of the skirt, it's pretty bad, but yep, it's a little too rough to use. So my plan is now I've got another third bottom end that had piston on it, which seems to be a standard bore piston, same as this is my good motor. That one's got the nice clean crankshaft in it. This one, that crankshaft spins, but it's pretty rusty. So goal is to use this bottom end. This is the piston that was in it. This is the original cylinder, which the cylinder looks okay, but let me show you here. This is one of the rings that came out of it. And if I slip this guy into there and then just get a, yeah, you see that ring doesn't even want to stay in there. Normally you'd be able to squeeze it in there, then measure the ring gap. This ring gap's huge on this one. What I'm going to do, steal the rings off this guy. They should work on this piston also. We're going to put that together and see what sort of clearance we get, and then see if we can build a motor with compression. That's the next step. Somehow. I know I could just get a new piston and bore the cylinder out, but I've got a bunch of junk laying around, and I want to make one good motor out of this is my goal. Alright, this is one of the rings that I stole off of that third motor. I got it set in here. I use the piston on the bottom side to kind of square up that ring. Our ring end gap's kind of it's just a little on the big side. It's probably about 25 thousandths, which I think the book states, you know, probably about 20 thousandths the most, but so we might be a little low on compression, but it's a lot better than like an 1/8 of an inch that the old ring was. So yeah, there's the old ring. That's how big of a gap we had on the old one. There's our new one. So I'm gonna put these rings in there and throw this piston back in there, and then we'll do a compression check. Hopefully, if we get like 90 psi or above, this motor will run. All right, this is the cylinder I'm gonna use. So I just gave this one kind of a quick light hone, cleaned it up. It looks a million times better than the other one. Definitely not perfect, but I think there's a good possibility. With the right combination of parts here, we're gonna have hopefully something that'll run. Let's get back at it. Okay, it's time to put this motor back together. Okay, piston's back in there. Seems to spin nice and free. So those rings are definitely going to work on there. We'll see where we're going to get compression. So we'll put this head gasket back on and the head. Tighten it down. See what we get. Okay, moment of truth. We got it back together. Put a compression gauge on here. It feels okay. Turn it over. Definitely a lot better than it was before. We'll see what sort of value we get. Try to pull it over here a couple times and see what it does. Well, that wasn't great. Well, I think I need to work on this pull start some more. It's stuck. Okay, let's try this again. Fix some stuff in my recoil there that was causing it to bind up. So we're going to yank this over here and see what sort of compression we can get. It feels a million times better than it did before. Before there was no resistance. Alrighty, we're a little over 90 psi there, which this is just a Harbor Freight gauge, and I put this on a million motors, and I know if I see over that mark, they'll run. They'll have enough compression to run. Which in theory is probably have like 120-ish or something if it was perfect motor on a perfect gauge, but I know it's going to run with this compression, so as long as we get spark and get good fuel, I think this thing should work. So if this motor is going to run, I'm going to need a clutch for it. So I'm going to pull a clutch off of one of the spare motors. I did not have a puller for this, so I just made one. So the inside thread here is a 7/8 fine thread. So I went and found, this is actually a hitch pin that I found at Tractor Supply, cut the end off of it and welded a nut on it. And there's a 3/4 inch bolt. Drop that down the hole like that. Thread this guy in here. And then we're going to hit it with the impact and see if this clutch pops off. Oh, just like that. Well, that's better. Alright, so I just put the motor back in, and then down here, there we go. Hooked up my stator wires, and then that went to the CDI. I was actually missing a coil for it. This was a random coil I had laying in my bucket of parts. Over here is the kill switch. I did just check this to make sure that that was working. So we're gonna check and see if we got spark here. Assuming we got a good stator and a good CDI, we should have some spark. We'll get that nice and close. Yeah, I think I saw some spark there. Oh yeah, we got some spark. So we've got a motor with compression and spark now. Well, let's just double check and see if the kill switch works. The kill switch was on. Now I just flipped it back off. And it looks like our spark's gone. I just pulled the carb off and the throttle cable, and then over here at the throttle itself, notice this thing is stuck. First I thought it was the cable, but the cable's loose here, and this guy won't budge at all. So this little shaft that the throttle's pivot on is stuck. So gotta heat it up with a torch and see if I can get this thing to break loose so we can have a throttle. Okay, I just took the carb off this Odyssey and pulled the screws out of the bottom. Let's see what this guy looks like. Yep. Oh, it's got some water in there. Oh boy. Well, we'll try and get this thing cleaned out and get it soaking and see if this carb is still usable. So I went to start cleaning out this pipe because it was all full of rust and everything when I pulled it off, and found out we got a giant rust hole in it. So I think what happened to this motor is the way that this pipe was kind of sitting in there, it was angled up like this a little bit. I'm guessing the thing sat outside and it was probably catching water in here, and then it filled up the pipe down there and rusted out the pipe, and then started filling up the bottom of the motor, and that's what caused that motor to get all rusty down inside. So if we go back and look at the original motor sitting here, say it was just completely stuck down here, but the upper part of the cylinder was fine, and even like, you know, this bearing here seemed fine, but it was all just down the bottom end. So I'm guessing this motor just sat outside and filled up with water and it rusted everything shut. So these cracks don't look that big. I think what I'm going to try is we're going to try tacking this back together and see if I can fill these gaps a little bit. If not, I'll just get a little sheet of thin metal and wrap that around there and seal it back up. So I looked at my junk pile and I had just kind of a random windshield mount clamp, which was about the perfect curvature. So I cut one of these up, welded it in there. I tried patching those holes, but it was too rusty and just kept blowing through it. So we got our hole patched. Not pretty, but it's going to do the job just fine. Got a few more things done on this guy. So I got the carb all cleaned out, put some new fuel lines on it. The old ones were just kind of cracked and rotted. Got my muffler back in place on this thing. Basically all I'm waiting on is a new throttle cable. When I was working on my throttle, which was stuck down here, got that freed up, but figured out the throttle cable is broken, so should have a new throttle cable here soon. And then this thing is basically ready to start firing, or at least try to get to run anyway. Put some new gas in it and see if this thing will run at all. Okay, it is all back together. My throttle cable's back in. I've got fresh gas in here. I've got it pumping and stuff. I've pulled this over a few times. It's popped off a couple times. It hasn't actually ran much on its own yet. I kind of got it flooded at the moment. I think I've got it about dried out again. I was trying to give it some prime with some carb cleaner down the intake, and then, yep, on these dry starts and stuff like this is always kind of a combination of if they want some extra fuel or not, but let's see here. So I'm going to pull it over a few more times. I think it's close to running. See, I've got fuel going down to the carb and stuff now, and drive the spark plug back out. So we're going to see what this thing will do. Hopefully it'll start running on its own here in a second. Or not. Well, I've taken a little break on the Odyssey here. This thing, I've pulled and I've pulled, and this thing will kind of pop and fire every once in a while. So when I put the motor together on the bench, my first compression reading was about 90 psi, which it would run off that. After I've kind of put this thing in the into the frame and everything and gone through everything, my compression's in the 70 range right now, and this thing will just kind of pop every once in a while. Just, it's not running on its own. The compression seems too low. I've tried a couple little things, try to bump it up, nothing really works. So I did a little looking on eBay, kind of running my options, and thought about boring this cylinder out and getting a piston and thinking about time for that. That takes a little bit of time, but I ended up finding a guy that was selling a brand new bored cylinder, and this is a 72 millimeter piston, so a little bigger. So it came with a brand new Wiseco piston and rings. Came with the head. Also came with another recoil. It was like $245 or so, which, you know, usually a piston kit's about 150-ish, and then, you know, having a cylinder board is another 70, 80, or 100 or so. So time-wise, this seemed to be the fastest route. So we've got a brand new top end now, so we should have compression. So I'm going to pull this motor back out, put this new top end on it, and see what our compression's like, and hopefully this thing will run. Okay, the motor's back out, so we'll pull this head off and the cylinder, get that old one off, get the new cylinder and piston in there, and check compression. So hopefully we should be like, you know, in that 120 range or so on it. That new piston and cylinder's in here. We'll slide this down. I've kind of found that it was almost easier to put the piston into the cylinder first and then finish the pin and the clips. Slide that down there. Okay, we'll put head gasket on here and put the head back on here and check compression on it. All right, motor's setting back in here again. I got a compression tester on here. We're gonna see what we get for some pressure. Oh, that feels a million times better. All right, we're at like 110 probably, 105, something like that. Significantly better than like 75, so let's see if that was our issue. We'll finish putting this thing back together and give her another try. All right, moment of truth here. Got everything hooked back up. I've got spark and stuff again still. So we'll give it some pulls here, and maybe I'll just try the choke first, and if that doesn't work, give it a fire some carb cleaner too. See what it'll do. Fired a little bit. Oh, recoil popped. Figured that was going to happen at some point. All right, here's the recoil I just took off. If I go and grab it, the little holes are not split, thrown out and grabbing. I think all that really happened is kind of this nut maybe came loose, but this is the other recoil that came with that new cylinder and piston that I bought. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some parts out of this guy, put them back into this one, replace that little bracket that I welded together, that little plate, with the correct stuff, and then this thing should be good to go again. Okay, the recoil is fixed again. We're going to try to start this thing again and see if this is the time. Will it finally go? Oh, that was a good start. See if it wants more fuel. Maybe. Okay, we're gonna try this again. I just had it run for a second and it started running away. Even shut the kill switch off, it kept going. Usually that indicates an air leak. I'm gonna try starting it again here and see if it runs away again and see what happens. turn the idle down a little bit. It seems to be idling real nice. So let it kind of warm up, and then I'll shut it off, and then we'll put a belt back on it and take it for a spin. It runs, and again, I've got the belt on, it moves again. Time to do a little shakedown test drive on this thing. See if we can get around the block. All right, first drive. I somehow squeezed in here. This thing's pretty tight. Well, I got the belt on, it moves under its own power. Let's go for a spin. Okay, the brakes work. Kill switch works. I made it around the block. Well, maybe we'll end here. I think this is a success. This thing came from the junkyard with a bunch of random other parts. I did have to buy a new top end for it, but now it runs and drives again. So I think I'll just kind of do some final detail on this thing. This thing's really bumpy. I think these tires are all kind of out around from sitting. It's just really bouncy on the cement, and it feels like it's got big flat spots everywhere. But yeah, I think that's probably the end of this one. Follow along, stay tuned for the next one.